Hello and welcome back to the Starcourt Lounge and happy Revenge of the Sixth Day. And in case that doesn't clue you in on what we're going to be discussing and talking about today, it is Star Wars. I know I am a little bit behind the times, seeing as we missed May the 4th, but you know what? Revenge of the Sixth is just as fine in my book. Star Wars has been a pretty large part of my pop culture life from a very young age, growing up with the original trilogy and going to see the prequel trilogy and even the sequel trilogy in theaters. So I have a pretty long-standing relationship with the franchise and series as a whole. That being said, I have seen the entirety of the Skywalker saga, episodes 1 through 9, all of seasons 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian, and I've watched a little bit of the Clone Wars show, the CG, and I've seen an episode or two of the hand-animated version of it as well. Just never really grabbed me quite as much. Still, from what I've seen, both were good shows and well put together and made, so credit to the teams that put those together. My thoughts coming into today, what I wanted to talk about, just kind of the direction of the franchise as a whole. I'm really liking it with all of the new expansions on Disney Plus. Really liked The Mandalorian. I thought both seasons 1 and 2 were incredibly well done, and it was really awesome to see how they're pushing new filmmaking techniques with the use of real-time projection mapping on the LED screens, rather than doing the more traditional, we're going to film in a giant green screen room, key that all out in post. So with their new technology, they're actually able to get more realistic lighting and everything on set, and it just looks far and away a lot better than trying to go the more traditional green screen route. Has its pluses and minuses, but I think it's cool to see the direction that they're pushing it. And then all the kind of spin-offs that they set up for in season 2 with Ahsoka being played by Rosario Dawson, the Andor. The one I'm most looking forward to is the Obi-Wan series that'll be coming out hopefully in this next year or so. I know there was some talks about them starting production and filming on it recently. Super excited to see Ewan and Hayden Christensen back for that. In addition to that, the Cassian Andor show, drawing a blank on what that one's called, but I'm really looking forward to that. I really enjoyed Rogue One. It had its kind of issues, mostly on some of the CG wasn't as good as it could have been, but hey, overall I really enjoyed it. It was a really cool, just straight war movie set in the Star Wars universe. You could change that into a World War II flick, and you'd still have a very compelling story. So I really like that. Solo, on the other hand, that one was a little bit hit and miss for me. It was not my favorite. I've watched it a handful of times, but I'm not going to go out of my way to watch it like I would with Rogue One. And then that kind of leads us into my main topic, the Skywalker saga. So that one, as I kind of alluded to, I've seen all of them outside of the original trilogy, because those came out before I was born, in theaters, and I've grown up with those movies. Really love them. Has a very dear spot in original trilogy. Has its issues. They're not perfect masterpieces by any means, which might be a slightly controversial thing to say, especially as it pertains to episodes 4 and 5. Most people feel that the 6th Return of the Jedi has its issues, especially in the last third on Endor, with the Ewoks being kind of a cash grab to sell toys, which sure they were, but I really enjoyed them. I think it's a nice kind of way to showcase that you don't need this ultra high tech, I guess, military and weaponry to win. You're able to just overthrow them with sticks and stones and logs, and you could be tiny little furry creatures and whoop ass, which is pretty cool to me. 4 and 5. 4 is probably, and this may be a little controversial, my least favorite out of the original trilogy. My favorite growing up was Return of the Jedi. I really loved the Sarlacc pit scene, that first third in Jabba's palace, all super, super dope. The fifth one, Empire Strikes Back, now is, I would probably rate as my favorite from the original trilogy. Just super solid whole way through. As a whole, original trilogy still holds up. Really love it. Prequel trilogy is more getting into the territory of what was coming out when I was growing up as a kid. Saw Phantom Menace in theaters, saw Attack of the Clones in theaters, and Revenge of the Sith in theaters. Looking back on them, there are weak points, especially in the dialogue in some areas. But that being said, I think it was a really well constructed trilogy, especially seeing as we knew how it was going to end pretty much with Anakin falling to the dark side, Palpatine / Sidious taking power of the galaxy and ruling over it, creating the Empire. I would have really liked to have seen more of the early stages of the rebellion that they allude to in some of the deleted scenes of the third movie. But I think all in all, from episodes 1 through 3, it has a very cohesive, well thought out and laid out idea and story. Like, you get great scenes like Darth Maul versus Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, which lightsaber battles from the original trilogy, kind of hit and miss. Episode 4, not super great, but you got two older guys just kind of swinging sticks at each other, and then it does ramp up and escalate in episode 5 and 6. But prequels just crank it up to 11. First major lightsaber scene you see, 2 Jedis in their peak just laying waste to droids. Then you see the little skirmish on Tatooine between Maul and Qui-Gon, and then you cap it all off with a double-sided lightsaber versus 2 Jedi. He ends up killing one of them and then gets sliced in half. That is a super solid way to introduce peak Jedi and Sith lightsaber battles and just make it so epic. And credit goes to everyone involved in that, from the choreographers and stunt coordinators, and of course John Williams' score. A+, just can't be beat. And it just continues throughout episodes 2 and 3. Episode 2, you throw them into that Colosseum, just hundreds of Jedi all together, lightsabers aflare, just laying waste to battle droids and Geonosians and just being badass. And the start of the Clone Wars, and you can kind of see the Jedis. And then, of course, that all leads into Revenge of the Sith, which is just epic fight after epic fight. You start on Grievous's ship with Dooku versus Anakin and Obi-Wan, and then you go to the Obi-Wan versus Grievous fight. The weakest one is probably the Sidious fight against like Windu and all of them, just because they wanted to keep Ian McDermott as much in camera as possible. So there's a lot of weakness there because he's not super comfortable, and you can kind of see that and tell that. But then you close it off on Obi-Wan versus Anakin on Mustafar, and Yoda versus Sidious in the Galactic Senate. So you get pure, unadulterated lightsaber combat on one side, and a battle of force and of the Force and wills in the Galactic Senate. Just the two sides of that coin are just so well done and edited together. And again, John Williams just elevates everything to a whole nother level. Now, on the flip side to all of that epicness, a lot of people like to poke fun at, draw criticisms to dialogue and the very kind of flat characterizations of a lot of the characters in the prequel trilogy, which, okay, yes, dialogue is a little bit weird. George Lucas has never been super strong at that, but to my mind, at least from a characterization standpoint, a lot of people like to say, oh, there was not a whole lot of character development. Anakin's just been kind of a whiny child throughout the entire prequels. Like, okay, yes. But he is like a 10-year-old kid who was voluntarily left his mother / taken by this cult of monks who fight with lightsabers and this mystical force, and is told to suppress all of your feelings. You cannot love or hold any connections, otherwise you will turn to the dark side and be evil. And he isn't exactly set up to succeed very well with Obi-Wan as his master, being that they are more closer to age to an extent. Obi-Wan was still in the very, still in his training when Qui-Gon died, and he only got promoted to a Jedi Knight because he defeated Maul, and didn't even really want to take the kid in. He only did so because his dying master told him to. That was his last wish, and he did that in order to honor Qui-Gon, not because he felt some dying devotion to this scavenger kid from Tatooine, which just isn't a great way to start off a master and apprentice relationship. It does improve. They become more and more like brothers, which is great. But for a master and apprentice relationship, I think Anakin would have really thrived under more of the father-son type of mentorship role that he would have likely gotten out of Qui-Gon. And being that Qui-Gon was also more prone to bending and pushing the rules of the Jedi Order. I mean, that's pretty much the whole reason that he's not on the Jedi Council, as he laid out in Episode 1, because he's not blindly faithful to the Jedi dogma. And he's like, the Jedi have flaws. We're just too prideful, and we have too much hubris to see it. And you see that play out with Yoda even. He's just like, yeah, I can take on Sidious all alone. He ends up losing. Same with Obi-Wan. They even talk about his arrogance and everything like that in a couple of scenes in episodes 2 and 3. And yes, they might not be super dynamic characters where they start off in episode 1 and are drastically different in episode 3 when everything really takes shape and is that turning point into the original trilogy. But that's done on purpose. It's meant to highlight the fact that the Jedi were too prideful to change their ways and adapt, and they were blinded by that, and that allowed the Sith to come in and take power. It's so well done in my eyes, even amongst all of the little flaws of the films. The overall vision is just executed so well because of that, because we had a cohesive idea and narrative coming into making episodes 1 through 3. We know where we're going to be starting, we know where we're going to be ending, and we know how to kind of add the spice in between to make it compelling and interesting. And I think keeping character development to a minimum, keeping characters more static than perhaps we did in the original trilogy, plays into that. Because otherwise, if we have super dynamic characters, we're going to be more prone to change, realizing our flaws and everything, and then that takes away a more plausible way for Palpatine and the Sith to rise and come to power. So I think that was super well done. On the other hand, you see in the sequel trilogy, episodes 7, 8, and 9, the exact opposite, at least in my opinion. Still like the films, had a lot of fun with them, but I don't feel there was a strong, cohesive idea of where we were going from episodes 7 to 9. I think that JJ came in on episode 7, did a tremendous job, and was like, all right, here's my mystery about who Rey's parents and heritage is, and left it up to everyone else. I think they're like, we want to make movies to get returns on our $4 billion investment into this franchise and company. So let's do it. Let's bring back some of these old characters, and we'll kind of shoot from the hip. We'll make it up as we go. And I don't think it helped that they retconned the whole expanded universe, which is now Star Wars Legends. Although in retrospect, that's probably a smart move, because then they don't get pigeonholed into, well, Luke, Han, and Leia were doing such and such a thing on this planet in this time period, so now we have to make a movie about it, and we have no wiggle room to make our own story. Which would have been fine if they had a good and compelling story to tell. I think what happened is they're like, all right, we're going to slate this for 3 movies, release them 2 years apart with these anthology films in between, and just crank out Star Wars stuff to make our money back and make a profit. And didn't have a solid and cohesive idea of where they were going to be taking Rey and Finn and Poe. And I think that's a large part of why we see minimal character development, but to the detriment of the characters. Like, a lot of people give Rey's character a lot of flack for being too good and perfect at everything right off the start, which is, I don't think, a valid criticism to me. She grew up alone on a desert planet scavenging. She would have to learn a hell of a lot of skills to survive on her own that long and not get like sold into slavery, killed, or whatever might have happened. So I think that she's competent with her bow staff and resourceful and everything like that. Awesome. The Force thing, I think, is like, she heard stories about the Jedi. She gave it a try, and it happened to work because she's strong in the Force. Cool. I don't have issues with that. I think the issues I usually run into with it, we start with her being very proficient at a great multitude of things, and we end at her more or less in the same kind of spot. There wasn't a whole lot of internal struggle with Rey's character. I feel that she was the protagonist of the trilogy, and that is what was detrimental to it. I think if they would have focused on Ben Solo and Kylo Ren as the protagonist and the point of view character of the trilogy, it would have been leagues better and more cohesive. He, as a character, I felt they did a great job of fleshing out and having a cohesive idea, for the most part, of where they wanted to go. Starting at episode 7, he was very conflicted, trying to live up to his grandfather's dark legacy, not so much his light. And he was a dark side user being pulled to the light, which is just super interesting. And then episode 8 just kind of took a turn on the entirety of everything and pushed him super, super dark. But I think that was super interesting as well. The Force Bridge connection that Snoke put between Rey and Kylo. Super cool. And then you kind of get that backtracking on episode 9 where they're like, yeah, he's bad, but he's redeemable. Which is, I think, a testament to the overall lack of vision and direction that the trilogy had going into production. I think you can very much tell that JJ had an idea of what he wanted to do, and they're like, well, we're going to do 3 different directors. And then Rian Johnson was given the helm of episode 8 and was told, all right, you've got to touch on these bullet points and make sure they're in your film. But he definitely had an idea of what he wanted to focus on. He wanted to make it more of a character drama focusing on Kylo and Rey, and just make everything very kind of bleak. I mean, it ends the film with the entirety of the main characters and the Resistance on the Millennium Falcon fleeing the First Order. Similar vein to Empire. I enjoyed that. And then you have this whole pivot when episode 9 is being produced, where the director on that one, whoever it was originally, I forget, fell through. So they bring back Abrams, and he's like, awesome. There's a whole bunch of fan backlash for stupid reasons on episode 8. And then we're going to kind of retcon some of these things, and we're going to finish it off the way I think it should be done, or how I envisioned it, not the way that we had planned it out, necessarily potentially planned it out at the beginning, due to these kind of visionary differences. And then some of the things that kind of took me out of episode 9 were those kind of tongue-in-cheek moments poking fun at episode 8, like when Rey's at her lowest point after like discovering she's a Palpatine or whatever. She flies back to Octo, takes the Skywalker lightsaber and chucks it into the fire, and all of a sudden Luke catches it and he's like, that's no way you should be treating a Jedi's weapon. It's like, okay, I see what you did there, JJ. Cute. I think it just too self-aware without a clear identity across the 3 films. And whereas it might have been better produced with better visual effects and dialogue and everything like that on a technical aspect compared to, like, say, the prequels had the cohesive A to B arc for all of its characters, whereas the sequels did not. Did that take away from my enjoyment on them? No. I went in and saw each of them twice in theaters. I saw them on opening day, and then I saw them like a week later each. Loved all 3 of them. Had tons of fun seeing them in theaters. There were awesome moments in all of them. My favorite out of the sequel trilogy, probably Force Awakens. I think that's the strongest one. When episode 9 came out, I did a whole marathon watching episodes 1 through 8 and was super reluctant to watch episode 8 because I was worried about not liking it as much as I would like, things like that. And then watching it, sitting down and watching it, all of the little gripes and things like that the Star Wars fandom and critics and everything like that were kind of focusing and harping on, I'm like, these aren't that bad. This is actually a really great film that has been kind of tainted in my memory by all of this negativity, which isn't well deserved. Is there a couple of scenes that I don't care for? Sure. I think my least favorite one that I like to point out is that opening scene with Poe talking to General Hux over the like space phone intercom thing, and he's doing like this whole phone prank thing. Is that in Poe's character? Sure. He's that kind of witty smuggler type Han Solo-esque cheeky guy. All right, that's fine. The issue I have with it is it's too Marvel-like humor. It's too quippy, Robert Downey Jr.-esque Iron Man humor that you'd see in like a MCU film, which I don't feel fits very well in Star Wars. Like that entire like sequence, all I could think of was like, oh, these are jokes that you could probably hear in an MCU film. These don't feel very Star Wars-like. Star Wars can do humor. I think it just has a very different kind of tone. That's usually the biggest one that kind of irritates me. The rest of the film, I don't have much issue with. I thoroughly enjoyed it on watch back during that. Episode 7, that one, not a whole lot of issue. It's pretty much just a safe retread of episode 4. A lot of the same kind of story beats and everything like that. I think the biggest thing kind of looking back on it across the entire series is it sets up a lot of mysteries that I don't know that they had solid, cohesive answers that they were going to follow through on, especially when you kind of look at the pivoting done in episodes 8 and 9, where you throw them into 8 and Rey's heritage and everything is just kind of like Luke does with the lightsaber at the start, thrown out the window. It's like, oh, you're a nobody. Your background doesn't matter. You're just some random person on a desert planet, which I think would have been awesome to do. But then people didn't like it. Backlash came and ensued. And then J.J. Abrams came in and was like, all right, we're going to retcon that and make you actually a Palpatine. That might have been the play from the start. I don't think they were cohesively setting that up from the start, I think is the biggest issue. JJ very much likes to propose a mystery and not necessarily follow through with a satisfying conclusion on it. So here's hoping that in the future, if and when more Star Wars trilogies are made, that they have as their first step, they set up an outline of the 3 films that they will have as a cohesive, well thought out arc for their characters. And I guess to an extent as well, one of the things that doesn't necessarily work to the benefit of the sequel trilogy is that if we look at least with my generation, a lot of the newer Star Wars fans, when we look at the arcs of the OT and the prequel trilogy, we've got all those films that we can just sit down on a day and watch them all. But as episodes 7, 8, and 9 were coming out, we're seeing them one at a time with a 2-year gap between them. So we're left for 2 years, year and a half, or whatever it was, to sit and propose and postulate, what's the secrets? What are the big mysteries? Breaking down the frame-by-frame trailer analysis and the rise of like theory crafting and things like that have become a very popular thing online. It was just, to an extent, impossible to craft anything that's going to be able to satisfy everyone, because we all have our own ideas, like, oh, Rey should have been a Kenobi, or she should have been no one, she should have been a Palpatine, a clone of Luke, Mace's daughter. All these kinds of weird theories were coming out, and when it comes out that she is nobody, you've got 80% of the fandom who doesn't like it, so they pivot, and it's, oh, now she's a Palpatine. And at the end, she claims the mantle of Skywalker, which they like made in some weird way feasible. One of the more recent comics saying that Luke's hand might have been used for cloning purposes for Palpatine in episode 9. They didn't explicitly say it, but they did have a hand floating in a Bacta jar. So obviously most people figured, hey, who's famous in the Star Wars universe that lost a hand? Luke. So, I mean, it's possible that she's in some weird genetically cloned way part Skywalker. So it's just a weird kind of messiness that you get with that. And filling in the blanks with external media, comic books, whatever it might be, is not my favorite manner of crafting a compelling universe. Marvel kind of tried that with their spin-off shows, where you have the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. doing things in between mainline Marvel movies, and then you reference it in the movie itself. That's cool, but I don't want to have to put that much of a time commitment into following every little B and C side story to understand references in the movies. They should be self-contained, which is, I think, something that Disney carried over from MCU into the Star Wars sequel trilogy of we don't need to really answer these background questions on some of these people, because we could just throw it in a comic book, throw it in a novel, and that's good enough for us. And to be fair, we get a bunch of characters in the original trilogy. We don't get a lot of their background. Like Han, we know that he's a smuggler, but we don't get his life story necessarily. Or Boba Fett, he's just a badass bounty hunter. What's his background? Who knows? Until episode 2. Oh, he's a clone of another bounty hunter who wears the same armor. Okay. But I think mystery done well like that, where it's just like, you're a cool, badass character. You don't need to go into a whole explanation of your background, but we can if we want, works. But then you get that with the sequel trilogy, and it's like, okay, you get Captain Phasma. You set her up to be this really cool, awesome character. She's got silver stormtrooper armor. She's a female stormtrooper. And then she seemingly goes out down the trash compactor in the first one and is like, oh, well, she died. She didn't have a lot of bearing or impact on the story outside of just looking cool. And she somehow comes back for episode 8. And we don't know how that happens until it's explained in a comic book or a novel. Cool. I don't like that method of storytelling because it's too much of pulling you into a given fandom, and you have to live and breathe by us in order to know what's going on. I don't think that's well done. You should be able to craft a self-contained, compelling narrative without relying on supplemental media. Take the prequel and sequel, or not sequel trilogy, the original trilogy, for example. Both well-done trilogies, self-contained, compelling narratives that have some breaks in between that can be filled in by external media. But those external media things, like Shadows of the Empire, the video game, kind of fills in what happens between the end of Empire Strikes Back and the beginning of Return of the Jedi. Do we need that? Does it explain certain things within the context of Return of the Jedi? No, not really. It's just a cool filler thing, like, oh, this is kind of what everyone was doing. Not having played it and understanding the story there doesn't harm your ability to follow the narrative. Same with the sequels, or not the sequels. Keep saying that. The prequels. That one you can watch from episode 1 to 3, and you get a solid, cohesive story without any weird, oh, so-and-so appeared to die in this one, but now he's all of a sudden back, inexplicably. Looking at you, Phasma. It's just well done. Do they have the spin-off Clone Wars show? Because there's a good gap between episodes 2 and 3 that focus on the Clone Wars? Yes. Do we need to watch the Clone Wars show in order to understand what's going on in episode 3 from the end of episode 2? Not really. It's all supplemental, not crucial to the story that we are watching in the trilogy itself, which is the way that I feel that they should be done going forward. Or if you want to focus on things like that, make it into a TV show so you can show every little mundane type of thing that you want to show. That's where the Mandalorian works. You follow him on his adventure to adventure, episode to episode, and you can do the more kind of low-key, boring ones. You can go from breaking people out of a prison ship to fighting an ice spider and everything in between, because you get more time to be with these characters in a TV format than a 2 to 3 hour movie. So you can kind of expand and do those types of things and do it effectively. And it also helps that with The Mandalorian, they had a cohesive vision of what they were doing. Now, that all sounds like I am very down and just ragging on these Star Wars, especially the newer stuff. There's a lot of things coming out of Disney for the Star Wars universe that I absolutely love. The Mandalorian show, all of the upcoming spin-offs. Obi-Wan is coming back as Ewan McGregor. It's awesome. I cannot wait. I think they had some stumbling blocks, particularly with certain levels of the vision and cohesion of the sequel trilogy and the Solo film, but that was a lot of reshoots and director turnover and a lot of issues just on production. So that one I can kind of understand. But I think they're starting to rectify it now that they've got Dave Filoni and Favreau kind of like as the head guys working on this stuff. They're adamant Star Wars fans. They love the source material and they're going to do it justice. So not that it's all doom and gloom. I think we're in a sort of Star Wars renaissance right now with these people at the helm making amazingly high quality stuff for Disney Plus, and they can then take that and expand it into the films if they want to. I don't think it's necessary, but if they have a compelling story to tell that'll fit a film format, I am all behind it. All in all, my general threshold of whether or not the movie is good or not, when I put it on and I sit down for those 2.5 hours and watch it, do I have fun? That is my bar. And I can say unequivocally across episodes 1 through 9, even the anthology films, a little bit to an exception on Solo. That one, I have fun with it, but it's not my favorite. Be that as it may, episodes 1 through 9, Rogue One, absolutely love. Rogue One is what anthology spin-off films should be. Even with all the different reshoots and directorial issues that they were having in production, they turned out a very well done, compelling Star Wars war film. And when I sat down in theaters each time to watch Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker, I thoroughly had fun. I had chills in the fight scene on the Death Star Outer Rim with Kylo and Rey, the callbacks of Luke rising his X-Wing out of the water to the Yoda theme on Dagobah, the throne room, everything. I have fun with the movies, and I nitpick them because I love them. And I'm hoping beyond hope that with Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau at the helm and all the other wonderfully talented people who are making The Mandalorian such a success, and with these upcoming spin-off shows obviously being helmed and kind of directed in part under the creative vision of these people, that it's only going to get better and better and better, and they are able to look back on some of the mistakes and shortcomings of the sequel trilogy. And if they go forward with more trilogies, like they've been talking about with Rian Johnson having his own trilogy and some other directors like Taika Waititi, that they recognize that they need the groundwork and foundational material and to stick to their guns to tell that comprehensive arc and not have it so wishy-washy. And with the people that they've got in charge now, and the people that they've been bringing in as directors on Mandalorian, I have great faith that if and when it goes back into a movie trilogy, that we are going to be able to see Star Wars done justice by Disney. And I am so excited about that. So, as the words made immortal by Obi-Wan Kenobi, may the Force be with you always. Alrighty, you beautiful people of the internet, I really appreciate you coming by and listening to me talk and ramble on about Star Wars. This is a segment that I'm looking to start at the end of each of my podcasts, where I highlight different media and things like that that I've been listening to and watching that I think is super well done and I've been having a lot of fun with. So this episode's focus point is actually on a podcast called the History of Egypt podcast. It is such a intriguing and interesting podcast produced by a person named Dominic, who's like a legitimate Egyptologist. and he starts it off, episode 1, at the mythical creation of the land of Egypt, and this is going era by era, highlighting things such as the pharaohs and kings who made the Great Pyramids and lesser known ones. And one of the ones I listened to recently, he was sitting down and interviewing a fellow Egyptologist from one of the universities in Roanoke, Virginia. Ooh, mouthful there. And they're talking about the economy of ancient Egypt and how she's looking to get a better understanding of that by studying the clay pots and jugs and beer, to better understand the economy that was thriving in ancient Egypt in that 5th, 6th dynasty. It is such a fascinating listen. I highly recommend it. I'll include a link to it in the show notes. If you've got an interest in ancient Egypt and mummies and pharaohs and everything like I do, definitely give it a listen. And I'd love to hear what you're listening to in the comments when I post this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Feel free to leave a rating and a comment about what you're listening to currently that you think I would like. I really appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing you next time.